We're missing Chris too, but I think he may have a thing to do. So.
Welcome everyone to this week's IPLD Sync meeting. It's October the 3rd, 2020. And as every week, we go over the stuff that we've worked on in the past week, and then we go over the stuff that is on the agenda if there's any agenda items. Cool. So I start with myself. This week I actually, so where do I have to take? But this week I actually got plenty of time to work on really IPLD stuff. Most notable the Rust multi-hash stuff. It's currently in a library called Tiny Multi-Hash, but the plan certainly is to get it upstream. So this kind of like agreed upon, so it will go upstream. It's just a matter of time. There's still, I want to improve still the documentation a bit, and fix some minor things, but it should be ready soon. And on the multi-format stuff in JavaScript, there's also plenty of stuff going on because Aching Brain is currently working on moving the code from using node buffers to using U8 arrays instead. And it's of course, it's a breaking change for the whole API and all the libraries because we really have then U8 arrays moving in and moving out. It's not as bad for the Node.js users because Node.js buffer is also a U8 array. So you can at least pass in a buffer, but you will get a U8 array out. So if you want to use it again as a buffer, you have to convert it yourself. But that's ongoing and I mostly review the stuff. But I have actually one request for Rod that because there's an open PR on JS CID with the breaking change, and it would be good to get a thumbs up for this PR. I will post it in the notes later on because I basically told Alex I want to get the thumbs up from the IPLD team, and it's kind of like blocking him from other changes. So it would be great if you could do it on your day because I told him that tomorrow his day, so he's in the UK. He probably will get the approvals, as I don't expect any major blockers. Cool. That's all I have.
So it's renaming cid.buffer to cid.bytes.
Yes.
That's going to hurt.
Is there a reason for
that? We thought we'd do a breaking change anyway, and this way it really blows up quickly. So because if you just change the buffer stuff, so basically it's just
okay.
How is it a breaking change otherwise?
It's a breaking change because it doesn't return buffers anymore. So basically, the problem would be that the buffer property would return not a buffer anymore, but a U8 array anymore. Then
I'll buy it. Like having dealt with this in the past, like with a value type change like this, it's better just be able to give people an error rather than have it work most of the time until they try to access a method that's not there. Like it is better. Like no. I mean, we should move the JS multi-format CID to use bytes then, like as soon as possible, and deal with that change in all the JS multi-format stuff because we're using .buffer even though it's a U8 array.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So certainly if you have major concerns, please post it on the PR, and then we can also delay it. So it's not like you have to agree and you don't have a choice. It's really like I want your input on it. So to make it clear.
Yeah, I commented. I think that we should add some other properties that are going to make the future migration easier as well. But in general, like it's a good change. We should do it.
Okay, so
so we could add that integer code property as well.
Exactly. Yeah. And and accept them in the constructor.
Yeah, that's a good idea to do it now if we get as long as we're breaking stuff.
Yep. And both would work for a while, so people could migrate a little bit more gradually.
Yeah, I think Alex would want to make this change as minimal as possible, but I agree that we should introduce those as well. So I guess the trade-off will be that. So basically, if you are not happy with the bytes change and he's not happy with the other changes, we just do both.
In compromise.
Yeah.
That's terrible.
I'm not gonna lie. Like I think the bytes change is a good change. Like I'm not gonna lie. Like it's
no, I'm not lying. No, it doesn't trigger that. Like, hey, I will tell you for sure. It's but still, yeah. Cool. Cool. Next on my list is Rod.
Okay. Where's my tab? Right. So the bulk of my week was spent in the AMT, grokking what this one's doing and what the implications are, writing docs for it, having discussions about it, filing some bug reports and some pull requests just to fix some very minor things. Still haven't quite finished those. Because we don't have a spec for this, I'm ending up writing spec style docs in the thing itself, but I've also said that I will probably just write a spec doc for it. So I'm sort of still working my way up the stack of docs. I keep on saying to people about this one that the trade-offs are much more interesting than in the HAMT, and you would have a much bigger impact by tuning parameters with this one. So you can push it into really perverse directions depending on the parameters and the input types and the usage style. Whereas a HAMT is a lot more forgiving because you've got the hash to randomize things. Whereas this one, you can abuse it and make some really odd shaped trees, and also some lots of small blocks if you really do have sparse data, very sparse, then you can have lots of little blocks. And I think that's worth documenting in it. I'm trying to do it in a very clear way so that the busy file calling folk can read and understand and think about the trade-offs they're making, because I know they're concerned about chain size right now. So just got to finish that up. Now, Eric and I have been talking about a test fixture system for cross-implementation use. And this has been something that was on the agenda last year that I was working on. This is how I got into car and Zipcar in the first place, and never got back to it. But now with this Hampton AMT work, turns out Filecoin needs this because they have these implementers doing stuff, and there's some confidence issues with the code and its portability and the ability to implement things safely. So we planned out the basic framework for what this thing might look like, how we might put this thing together, and came up with a really interesting thing to shoot for. Fairly basic, but should be fairly useful. It might be worth at some point synchronizing with Volca on this, to think about how quickly a Rust one could be done as well. So the idea is we had these simple fixtures where there's like a file per fixture, per case, and you could, pick it out and run it against your implementation, but you could also use it to debug the process of where things break. And yeah, there's a bunch of interesting features about this thing that's fairly minimal as it is. So that's been on my mind since we talked about that, and trying to clear the deck to get to it. One of the issues that I had with that was at the revisit, the work I was in the middle of doing with the JavaScript car library, migrating to JS multi-formats, which I put down for the time being. I need to get that finished. So I went back and started seeing what it was like to pull in more of Michael's ESM migration stack into that, to do, But that's a whole rabbit hole in itself that I've been avoiding. So now I can't avoid it. So yeah, that, and then just a bunch of minor adventures along the way, just other things that keep on coming up and needing to be dealt with that are not worth itemizing. And that's me.
Quick question on that test framework. Are you guys factoring in all the unhappy path testing, or this for happy paths mostly?
So right now we are focused on minimum viable thing. So we don't have as much thought put into the negative. It's much more focused on the positive. And it's working initially on the assumption that it's not going to replace all of your tests for things. It's focused on a narrow use case of your thing has some basic testing that it covers its common, the things that you are concerned about in your implementation, and probably some negative testing as well. This thing is, its primary use case is I didn't mention this, but multi-block data structures is what we're thinking about, although I can see its utility across other kinds of IPLD applications. But it's very much, you have a thing that needs to behave in a very particular way and have very stable results. So you execute this thing against it and implement these steps, and you get these results along the way. And in that, you can also test the perverse use cases. So you can find the edges and push to extremes and see what it does in the cases where you as the tester have identified that this thing needs to be tested, what its edges are. And so, for example, we have that for the HAMT. We'll have some of that for the HAMT anyway, for my JavaScript implementation, that we can just pull in and say, using these parameters and these operations, you should get this really perverse version of it, and it should handle it okay. There is space for doing things like, we expect you to be able to produce an error if you push it this far, but we haven't thought very much yet about the error case. But the priority is to get this thing working, and then maybe come back and start considering how we add in some of the negatives.
Yeah, it's hard to test some of the stress cases and some of the more specifics without getting really implementation specific. And it's hard to get cross-language. You can't test error conditions in like a cross-language way. Like, that's going to be really difficult, not impossible. You can't even test stuff like, this mutation operation should produce these blocks in this order, because you're assuming that the implementation yields blocks as they get created, which is like not how all implementations necessarily work. It's mainly like, if I give you these operations to do, is this the new root hash of the tree, right? Like that's the machine. Or if I give you this tree of data and tell you to do this mutation operation on it, what is the new hash of the tree? Like those are really good and worthy tests and get at most of the stuff. But some of the crazier stuff is going to have to be more implementation specific.
Yeah, like in my JavaScript stuff, I test the number of loads and saves from the data store. And that's not something you want to do cross implementation, because everyone will do something different. So you just want to test that the results that it yields are consistent. That's it.
Okay, next on my list is Peter.
Yes, so another week mostly burnt in Filecoin stuff. The only IPLD related portion there is that I started helping Yanis a little bit with the Filecoin specs of how things fit together on the data storage side. And we actually have more meetings with him, because it turned out there is a lot to talk about, speccing this stuff out. In the meantime, when I had a chance, I started looking into what was a module for the Chenkar part of Dagger would look like, and spent a little bit of time over the weekend trying to compile different things. And yes, compiling GoToWasm is a little bit fat, but actually it's much smaller than I anticipated, to be honest. And well, another thing that I was working on while trying to talk through with Yanis how comp is calculated and generated. And while working on the dump drop additions to actually validate files, I started thinking at why is the portion that we're using right now so slow, and wanted to see what does it actually take to implement it to not be as slow as it is right now. And it actually is quite possible to do it at like, well, 10 times faster than what it runs as right now in RESTful. I haven't yet looked into like making this Rust friendly in any way. It was just an exploration. And yeah, then ran into some Go specific issues with streaming that are also weird, and I need to pare down an example for maybe Eric to look at. But this is also when I have time from rethinking Filecoin chains and testing deals and stuff. That's all I have.
Thanks. Next is Johnny.
Howdy, y'all. So I'm still working on DID stuff, decentralized identifier documents. I managed to get a subsection about CBOR and specifically DAG CBOR, IPLD in it. There is some work talking about how it was feedback that the way I wrote it mirrors a lot of DAG CBOR constraints, including deterministic canonical mapping of CBOR and keys as text. So there's a lot of talk right now about how to optimize and make more concise the key as int features of CBOR without requiring necessarily a separate registry. And so there's a lot of talk about CBOR LD with an external dictionary for keys mapping to attributes. There's a huge vulnerability in that like it's a mutable context that describes the JSON LD. And I have major reservations. It was talked about this week on the IETF CBOR session. And I'm trying to actually do some working with using, extending the at context to include a DAG CBOR, where the DAG CBOR actually is the mappings between the int to text fields for conciseness. But again, I welcome any feedback. They're giving me a lot of pushback as far as the section saying it's this is out of left field. It doesn't have enough implementations. I'm like, it's just CBOR. There's like tag. You can actually use tags. It's well represented. I'm not inventing anything new in cryptography. The DAG CBOR has CBOR tag 42. That's registered with IANA. It's there, and actually batteries included. And mostly, I think it seems as though there's just a lot of corporate jousting going on about implementations and special interest. And so I think I do need to update the example I gave in the document to be in the CBOR section to have a very clear COSE key format, but really working about the mappings between DAG CBOR and in particular DAG COSE format to pure COSE with the appropriate tags. And so I'm writing a library in Rust right now to do that.
Cool.
Johnny, are you in the loop on the folks writing the DAG Jose codex?
No, I think there's a couple different people. I think certainly the textile group I probably are using this, and then the 3box people, I think. But this is so Christian Lutzfus and I actually have talked about this and wrote a paper together years ago at the Rebooting Web of Trust. And so I think there's a lot of similarities to our the approaches, and I think mostly it gets into standards and semantics for interoperability, and I think to make sure we're all on the same page as far as how we solve it.
Okay, yeah. I just actually asked to have a call with them in a thread that I now can't find that I wanted to add you to.
Oh, please do, yeah.
But yeah. I want to get some clarity on it. I'm starting to question whether or not the way that we've been thinking about the representations, the data model, are actually the right thing, and there may be something else that we want to do here. So I'd really like to just kind of hear more about how they're using the format and how we expect to be used in the wild before we dig in.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think I was just
Cool.
thinking that as basically DAG codes. So the hard thing is like, can COSE be an acyclic graph? And I think that's tricky. How do you prove that it's an acyclic graph?
Yeah.
That would be more constraints for COSE.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, yeah, I don't know how you would represent it, but if you could sign the CID, then you know that it's signing a DAG, right?
Yep. And the way I get the paper I showed you guys before from the rebooting Web of Trust in Buenos Aires that was canceled was that I basically, in the tag 98 COSE signature, you basically use a tag 42 as a B string, which is a CID. But it's a little bit redundant because you're in the algorithm section, you're saying, let's say, SHA-2256 signature with EDSA, but then the CID actually has redundant information. It's a base prefix plus a SHA-2256. So it's double encoding. And I think also, I'm not sure as far as the payload, how long that payload can be. Right now, that would be like 55 bytes or something. So you're doing the SHA-256 plus the prepending all of those different separate bytes. And so I think, is that conformance? Is that proper? Like, will people understand that CID signed COSE signature with tag 98 pointing to a payload in tag 42? Is that cool? Do people understand that?
Yeah, I see what you're saying. Like, are you signing the binary with the tag, or are you signing the binary before it's tagged, right? Yeah.
Just signing the CID. Right now, I'm just signing the full CID, which includes all of the multi-base information.
I mean, you should. I think you should. Yeah. Like, you're not signing a DAG unless you sign the CID. If you're signing the multi-hash, you're just signing some data. Like, it doesn't have any meaning until you put the CID bits in it.
For what it's worth, we actually have entries. I think we already have them in the multi-codec table, or maybe they're just PRs, but I think they got merged where there is, it's not a CID, but it's essentially the hash of the payload plus the signature of it as a single CID. It's like 70 something bytes or something like that, with the correct codec and stuff.
There's a couple PRs, but the ones in multi-formats got merged, which are just adding the integer. But then there are open PRs that we're still talking about in IPLD for what the spec for the actual codec should be. And those like have a fair amount of like unresolved questions in them. So.
I'm just bringing it up as it's prior art that somebody has done this kind of thing in a different system.
And it's already in the table, the multi-codec table?
I believe so. I'll have to while we're talking.
I'd love to see that actually. I didn't know about that.
Okay, that's me.
Okay, thanks. Next is Eric.
So I've got more code gen news. We can now generate structs with tuple representations. That is done. Kind of exciting because that is one of the representations that's really commonly used by folks who are sensitive to the size of their serial data. I'm looking at you, Filecoin and Lotus people. They've used them almost everywhere. It's like 99% of their code. So this is an important one to get for their usage. And in particular, it's shown up in some HAMP stuff that we've been taking a look at that we mentioned last week. So we're poking around that, and this will help there. Codegen for unions with kinded representation is also about 85%. I'd expect it to come out shortly, but needs a little bit more. Error handling, as always, is actually the trickiest part. In a pleasant surprise, the any type that we've known for a while we'll need, but we sort of balked on specifying it as thoroughly as we wanted to a couple months back. It turns out it's easier than we thought. It's just a kind of union, and that is about it. It turned out to be really easy to whip up a union that has all the basic types and then add a map type that is just map of any to any, and any composes over this. And so, like, of course, you've got a psycho in that definition, but that turns out to be sort of fine. So, and I did a little prototype of codegenning that, and it just kind of worked. So that was a very pleasant surprise. In the future, there might be some more work to do there. Something that has come up as a pattern is we might need general configuration for whether or not to use pointers when assemblers are embedded in other assembler types. To recap, node assembler is an interface in Go IPLD prime, and one node assembler usually embeds the assemblers for all of the child types so that you can pre-allocate one big slab of memory and it contains all of the room that you're going to need to do all of the data assembly and munging and all of the state tracking that's needed while you're in the middle of the munging and the validity checks and so on and so forth. And so by embedding all of these things, we get one giant allocation and it goes fast. But that means if you have a cyclic type definition, like any can be a union that contains something called map that has a value called union or any cycle. If you embed the assemblers for any in the assemblers for map and the assemblers for any and the assemblers for map, this would suggest that you're going to have to reserve an infinitely large slab of memory. Of course, this doesn't compile. So sometimes we need to say, I don't want to embed this assembler. I actually do want it to be a pointer for once. Right now, there's a couple of cases where that happens anyway. In particular, it happens to happen in unions and when they're configured to use a certain memory layout internally. But this is kind of a coincidental solution and it shouldn't be the only solution. So some future work will probably be there, but nothing's blocking on it at the moment. So we move on. Looked at test fixture stuff a little bit as Rod already talked about. Michael, there you go. And we've been quietly poking at what it would be like to implement a new HAMT in Go and use some of this cogen stuff. But that's very early, so we're going to see how that goes. And maybe I'll talk more about it later, but probably not too much today. And that's about it.
Cool.
Thank you.
Looks like I'm up next.
Yeah.
Yeah, so the big thing was a lot of progress on docs. So a lot more stuff there for the JavaScript stack. The tutorial is getting pretty locked in, getting to the point where other people need to do stuff now. I moved over all the schema docs that Rod had written and all that config stuff into Vue. Took me a while to figure out those sidebars, Rod. That's a weird format in Vue for those. But it's all nice now. Yeah, so the doc side is really coming along. I really now need contributions from other people before it can move forward anymore. And then I took Thursday and Friday off, which I spent polishing up DagDB and showed it to many more people. It's surprisingly, like, a lot is there. I'd forgotten how much was there. There's a lot of code in DagDB and a lot of it works. So people are starting to use it and poke around now. I'm sure there are bugs, but they're the kind of bugs now that we're not going to find except by using it. I mean, there's 100% code coverage. There's no more bugs to find that way. So yeah, that's also looking pretty good. Feedback so far has been really positive. I showed some stuff to Carson a while back, actually, and he said that a lot of what they were looking at doing in Threads v2 is actually already there. So we've been talking about what it would look like to do Threads v2 on top of DagDB. So that's a fun conversation moving forward. And that's where we're at.
Cool. Does anyone have any agenda items? Because I might have one, because I'd like to get a bit, except that PDA is a more important one. I want to know from Michael and Rod about the CID changes, because I will probably talk with Alex tomorrow about it. So is it just properties we can already populate, and it's basically it's more or less a change internal within CID, and you don't even need to care about a lot from the outside? Or does it mean that you also need to care from the outside and basically refactor all the dependencies that depend on CID?
Rod's saying something, but he's muted.
They wouldn't be breaking changes, they'd just be feature additions.
Okay.
Yeah. The things that I'm saying to add are just feature additions because they are features that you need to migrate to in the future. So there's no breaks. Yeah. There's breaks when you migrate to the next one, but
Yeah, but so if I recall correctly, it's for example the code thing. So it is basically then just populated when you we currently use strings, but we have the code from somewhere. So we will just when you create the CID, we would just populate the code.
You have it anyway.
Yep. I mean, you can look up the string bytecode from the multi-code table because you have the whole thing. Yeah. And the same in the constructor, when you take an integer, you can just convert it to the string and keep the string behavior there. But at least the external usage, you can migrate to the new forms. So
the logic for the constructor might be a tiny bit awkward, but it's not super fancy. It's just because you'll have multiple numbers. Then you'll need to switch on. So you got the version codec will need to switch on number and string, but
you should look at that code in the old CID. It's a little I don't know if it's going to be easy or hard, but it's like a little bit more composite than that. They're like
that's why I'm saying
checking the number of arguments and yeah.
That's why I'm saying it's not going to be just a simple matter of exposing a property. It's like a little bit of algorithmic hacking there.
Well, in the exposed property, you can just use a getter and just do it when you need it.
Okay, so it will be a break. Well, it will be an addition on the constructor, but it will still work with the old one. So basically,
it should not break anything. Yeah.
What I'm wondering is, could we do a 1.0 release without those things and add them in a 1.1 release or something?
You could, but like the whole point of getting them in is that when you do the breaking change, you can message, by the way, you may just want to, if you're going through and converting all your code to use buffers, you may also just want to use these code properties instead and instantiate this way, because that's what's going to work.
It would be really nice. It would be really nice to have the same functionality in both libraries. Yeah.
It's not like a sembear thing like issue. It's really just like a timing issue. Like you want to be able to message it all at once, because people are going to be in that code migrating to Unidata Array anyway. So.
And then, because if you pushed out a version that just did Alex's changes, then you could easily just sit on that version and you'd be fine mostly. But then you'd have an extra level of pain if you wanted to migrate to the newer stack and you hadn't started that work. But this gives you the optionality to start that work at any point. So you can, at any point, you can say, oh, maybe we should switch to integer multi-codecs, and you can do that with the old library. That would be really good.
But the point would be that as it has so many it's a huge dependency tree in JS IPFS, and so it will still take a long time until people can actually use the CID. So, I mean, so if we would do a release tomorrow, you can't really use it in a code base because you don't have all the other dependencies that need buffers and so on. Basically, what I'm saying is we have still a lot of time to implement 1.1 release because you can't use it anyway. Like no upstream dependency could use the new CID version tomorrow.
So Volker, I'll put it this way. So that repo doesn't have automated releases on each check-in. So like we could merge that PR and wait, but like when you put out the major breaking release version, we may want to get this code in before that, because that's when it'll be messaged, right?
The problem is that it basically blocks Alex hard. Like he basically it's down the stack. Like it's basically it's blocking DEG, PB, and therefore Unix FS, and therefore IPFS.
Okay, all right, whatever.
So
how about I try and put something in today, and if I fail, then you can go ahead and release. But I'll try and get a PR up today that does it, and then then we can shorten the time frame.
Yeah. So even if you basically get it halfway done, and I basically it's almost done, and small things I can also fix those. Like basically, so if we talk about the days range, that's totally fine. But it sounds like, well, we will do it eventually sometime. Then that's too long because I really don't want to.
It's not a big change. It really isn't a big change. It's just it's just the tedium of doing it.
Yeah. And the problem is that I'm not really I'm not that much into the details of the new stuff. So if you do it, God, that's totally fine. And then I'm happy. And so let's try this and then just
Right.
post a comment
Tests
and look it
and
up.
TypeScript definition, and it's tedious.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Cool. Yeah. That's perfect then. Okay. Peter, you wanted to say something. If I recall correctly.
Oh yes. Yeah. So this is an idea that I had like about a week ago, and I just want to kind of like solidify it that we want to do this going forward. I realize Johnny is here. Like, don't be alarmed. What I'm proposing does not actually affect what you're doing directly. So we seem to be running into a problem where across the ecosystem, like in Go, in Rust, I don't know what the story in JavaScript is, probably also similar, where we have these CBOR encoders and decoders, which we have a hell of a time parsing to actually do the right thing for DAG CBOR being more strict, more resilient, more this, more that. And it seems that we're basically handicapping ourselves by saying that stuff is based on CBOR, or worse, adding CBOR as part of the name. So several times it was floated that we should have a different, better format for objects. Sorry, for nodes, whatever you want to call it, for blocks. My thinking is that we should call it something that does not have any connotation, neither with JSON, neither with CBOR, with XML, whatever you want. It needs to be a completely different name, so that nobody implementing this gets the idea like, well, I'll just reuse this library that I have over here in my language already, and I'll just get it, fix the things I think are important, and I'll be done. That was kind of what I wanted to surface. There is not really a good place to document that either as a train of thought. So, yeah.
I mean, when we look at doing the new block format, we'll come up with a name that is very unique. It'll be fun. It'll probably start with IP something. But yeah, no. Yeah, this is a general. I mean. Yeah, wrangling the block format to do the right thing is pretty difficult. I think that like CBOR was definitely the right choice at the time that it was made, and it's probably still the right choice right now. But we now know enough about how that format works and how to write formats that it would make sense to do our own block format in the future. Like it's becoming clearer and clearer that like that would be really nice.
It's not even that CBOR is a bad format, it's that the nomenclature around this is sometimes drastically miscommunicative because it causes people to bring all sorts of baggage with and like assume that certain forms of extension are going to work when they absolutely are not. That's the really problematic one. We could also design a better block format whenever we want, but like that's not the entire issue either.
I mean, so much of this though is that like we have an existing format and we're trying to make it deterministic, and that's a really painful thing to do. Like taking an existing format and adding determinism is just like not fun, and we've kind of found all the corners of that now, or at least I hope that we found all of them. But this will like continue to come up, especially with people doing blockchain work. I think that like this is most visible when you're doing blockchain work because you always have to be agreeing on the same serialization. Like I'm not actually worried about the deserialization and being loose on deserialization. I'm only worried about being strict on serialization. And the bugs, like where these bugs present themselves, are so difficult to test for and so like problematic. Yeah, it's like not going to be good. Like I think that, yeah, it's very clear that at some point we are going to need to write a block format, and we're going to need to really think about this really hard. But yeah, we're stuck with what we got for now.
Yeah, but I think that like though the cool thing about the whole thing is that you can have your own block format basically. So I think it's like like we should at least then do two different ones, like at the same time. Like because I feel that you basically then end up with you basically optimize it for you either optimize the format or you optimize like IPLD or the stuff around it to a single format, which is totally not the point of IPLD.
Oh, I see what you're
So
saying.
you should have basically
Yeah,
two
yeah, yeah.
formats which are different. So you basically have still like, yeah.
Mhm. I mean, that's basically what DAG.json is. Like, nobody's really using DAG.json, I think. Like,
Yes,
they
exactly,
shouldn't.
yeah.
Like,
Yeah,
honestly, like, they really shouldn't. Like, it's
this is
not
what,
great.
this is what doc also, what a
Yeah,
DAG is about. I think it's good that we basically have
We have it
those
to keep
weird
us
formats
honest.
but we could also still use CBOR for it, like having basically CBOR as this other format that is difficult to deal with. But having
whatever new block format that we do, it should not do anything outside of the data model. It should do anything you can't do in DAG-CBOR. It should just be like a little bit more efficient, a little bit easier to ensure determinism, like all of that stuff. It shouldn't be anything that you absolutely have to use. Like DAG-CBOR should still work everywhere. The stack should still assume that the data model is taking care of it all. Yeah, I totally agree.
I mean, even having as a byproduct, having normal CBOR libraries being able to decode that would be fine. It's just we really can't advertise because it leads us to what Rat was saying. I think it was Tuesday, like, oh, we're going to do CBOR strict or something like that. You can't do a CBOR strict like with existing libraries. You need new libs for that.
I mean, it also shouldn't be underestimated. Go ahead.
There have been some good maybe things to study where people have proposed like TJSON for typed JSON, and it was like JSON plus some annotations, but they made a clear point of calling it something else, and then describing clearly the ways in which you can parse it as regular JSON. But like that whole, I can parse it as this old format you're familiar with was like a separate clause under its own H2 heading, right? After they had a name that was like, this is something new.
Well, isn't that how like JSON-LD algorithms work? And wouldn't it be, because as I understand it, when you're storing the block as CBOR, it's not ordered. It's basically just byte and whatever the convenient ordering is. But it's actually when you read, dereference and read, and then you're transforming it back into a human readable format like JSON, that's when you actually perform the deterministic mapping ordered as lowest bytes, right?
No,
that has to happen at right time.
We need to hash the
when it's stored
CBOR object
on disk. Okay, because I think that could be part of it, which is actually like, well, when you're deserializing it, you're applying a particular ordering algorithm, or you're conforming to the specific algorithmic format that actually you're applying to that during the transformation process.
Yeah. I mean, like the issues that we run into, right, are like, what are they? So there's one is the map ordering stuff. So like not everybody actually implements the map ordering correctly. We are now everywhere, but like we found that a lot of them don't, because it's kind of like a weird corner of the spec. And then the other one is the integer type stuff, where it says that you should always be using the smallest representation. And a lot of people don't. And I think part of this too is like, it's not even what you're saying, Peter, where like people pull their CBOR library and use it to do whatever. It's literally people don't even implement all of CBOR. They implement like the features in CBOR that they care about in this thing, and then like that's it. And so it's like incredibly naive and specific. And that's
well, or
a lot of issues. Like, go ahead.
Or they implement more. They implement like unlimited lists and and things like that. But to Johnny's point, it's not about what you can deserialize. It's always about what's on disk, because what's on disk is what's on the network, and what's on the network is what you can validate whether you are being attacked right now or you actually got the right CID. This all happens before you decode anything. So all of this is super important at the right time.
I mean, the nice thing about doing a new block format is that we can basically front load all the links up front. And so you can get all the links out without parsing the whole block. So that's really cool. But also it just would like not be as easy to write these naive implementations because you have to do a bunch of upfront work to understand the block format. So people like would not be writing a lot of half-baked libraries for serialization or deserialization. I think that would be nice. Adding like some application-specific compression in there too would really help. Like it should just be like a little bit hard to not implement the whole thing. I think that would be great.
Yeah, I saw that in the IETF call this week, which is actually there's a lot of prefix compression. It's actually like
Mhm.
in a rumped, the first byte in the array, you actually can like a bunch of IUIs or URIs are actually all starts with a very similar thing. So you can compact that and basically like as so it's but that I don't know that would be a deterministic way of doing it. So
No, you can definitely ensure determinism that way. Like that's you just have to ensure the ordering when you front load them. But yeah, it's totally doable. We run into that all the time. We should really do that.
I guess for like the DAG Zebra stuff that we need, we should like I think Rod did it already partly that in implementation. So implementing really only the Zebra that we need for DAG Zebra would be interesting. Like not implement, for example, tag support would be it just supports one tag. Like it doesn't even need proper tag parsing, but just like hard coded tag 42, because I think then the Zebra parsers should be pretty small.
It's not a tag anymore. It's not a tag anymore. It's a link.
Yeah.
But it's basically, but it like the code because like if you only lose those features, Seaboard is not that difficult to read or write. Basically, if you only do the stuff that we need, it would be interesting like how long it takes to implement it just for Rust, Go, JavaScript, Java, Python, or whatever.
You don't need the other map keys and stuff either. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's probably pretty simple. I would probably try it, I guess.
Can we kill the video? I have like one last thing at the end. I want to kill the video.
Yeah.
People can stick around.
Then
I just want to. Go ahead.
Yes. Then I would close the meeting. And goodbye, everyone.
Awesome.